The days after the confrontation with the council felt strange for Celine and Lyra. The village looked the same. The trees still swayed in the wind, and the river still whispered with its calm music. But something deep had shifted. They were no longer just exiles hiding in a small wooden cabin. They were rebels who had chosen love over duty, and they knew the council's eyes would never stop watching. Celine tried to find peace in the little moments. She walked with Daniel through the fields, holding his hand and listening to him talk about the simplest things: fixing roofs, planting seeds, mending tools. She had lived her whole life surrounded by power, rules, and endless expectations. But now she found joy in hearing about things that seemed so ordinary. Sometimes Daniel would stop, brush the hair from her face, and whisper, "You look like you belong here." She would smile, though deep inside she worried about the shadow of the council. Lyra was restless at first. The battle had left her burning with energy, and she spent long hours walking near the forest edge, scanning the skies. Emma followed her often, refusing to let her sink into silence. One evening, Emma tossed her a piece of wood and said, "If you keep pacing like a wolf, you'll dig a hole in the ground." "Come help me build." "Build what?" Lyra asked, frowning. "A shelter. A place stronger than your cabin. If they come again, you need something more solid." Lyra stared at her. No one had ever thought of protecting her before. She had always been the one protecting others. Without speaking, she picked up a hammer, and together they began. Emma's hands were clumsy, her grip imperfect, but her determination made Lyra's chest tighten in ways she couldn't explain. As the weeks passed, the sisters began to weave their lives more deeply into the village. Celine helped heal the sick, her gentle touch calming children who feared fever. Daniel watched her with awe, realizing she carried a gift far beyond what any human could understand. Lyra, on the other hand, became a silent guardian. Though the villagers feared her fierce eyes at first, they soon grew to trust her. When wolves prowled too close or storms threatened crops, Lyra was there, strong and unshaken. Emma often teased, "You pretend you don't care, but you're protecting them like a queen." Lyra would roll her eyes, but inside she felt pride. Still, nights were the hardest. Celine often dreamed of her people's cold voices, reminding her that she had betrayed them. She would wake shaking, Daniel's arms around her, his warmth chasing away the fear. Lyra fought her own demons: anger at the council, anger at herself for caring so deeply about someone who was not meant for her. One night, after Emma fell asleep by the fire, Lyra whispered to the flames, "I don't know if I deserve this, but I cannot let it go." Despite the shadows, love grew stronger. Daniel began to speak of a future with Celine, building a home together, planting gardens, sharing every sunrise. Celine listened with tears in her eyes, never telling him that her people might one day return to tear it all away. Emma, bold as always, looked Lyra in the eye one morning and said, "You can keep pretending, but I know you love me." Lyra stiffened, her pride warring with her heart, but then she whispered the truth. "Yes, I do." That confession changed everything. The bond between them deepened, fierce and unshakable. Emma was fire, Lyra was steel, and together they became something unbreakable. One evening, the four of them sat near the river, the stars glowing above. Celine leaned against Daniel's shoulder, listening to his steady heartbeat. Lyra stood near Emma, watching the reflections in the water. The night was peaceful but heavy with unspoken words. "Do you think they will return?" Daniel asked softly. Celine hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, they will not forgive us. They may come again, stronger than before." "Then we prepare," Emma said firmly. "We build, we fight, we protect what we love." Lyra looked at her sister. For once there was no fear in their eyes, only determination. They had been exiles, prisoners of punishment. But now they were something else. They were free women who had chosen their own destiny. Days turned into months. The seasons shifted, snow melting into spring, flowers blooming where fire had once scarred the earth. The sisters carved out a life with their human companions. Celine and Daniel planted a garden outside the cabin, their hands working the soil together. Lyra and Emma built walls stronger than stone, their laughter ringing through the village as they argued and teased. Slowly, the people of the village began to accept the strange women who had once seemed so mysterious. But even as life blossomed, the memory of the council lingered. The sisters often wondered if the silence from the skies meant victory or only a pause before a greater storm. Yet with each day their fear grew smaller because their love grew larger. One night, as they sat by the fire, Celine whispered, "I used to think exile was a curse, that it was the end of us, but now I see it was a gift. Because without it, I would never have found this life. I would never have found him." She glanced at Daniel, her eyes glowing with quiet joy. Lyra, sitting beside Emma, gave a rare smile. They wanted to break us. Instead, they made us stronger. Strong enough to love. Strong enough to fight for it. The fire crackled, sparks rising into the night sky. Above them, the stars glittered cold and distant, but the sisters no longer felt alone beneath them. They had found a new home, not in a place, but in the hearts that now beat beside their own. Even if the council returned, even if battles still lay ahead, Celine and Lyra knew one truth that nothing could take away. Love had given their exile meaning. Love had turned their punishment into freedom. Love had given them a life worth fighting for. And as the night grew deeper, Celine rested her head against Daniel. Lyra's hand brushed against Emma's. And for the first time in their long journey, the sisters felt not like exiles, but like daughters of earth, bound not by duty but by love. The winter winds swept across the village, carrying with them a sense of unease that only the sisters could feel. Lyra and Celine had grown comfortable on earth, more than they ever imagined they would. Days passed with laughter, shared food, long walks, and moments of warmth with the humans who had unknowingly captured their hearts. Yet deep inside, they both knew exile was not the end of their story. Their people had not forgotten them. It began one night when Celine dreamed. She saw the council chamber, cold and unforgiving, filled with the voices of the elders. Their words were sharp as blades. They are forgetting their punishment. They are making ties. They are betraying their kind. Celine woke with a cry, her body shaking. Lyra rushed to her side, gripping her shoulders. "What did you see?" Lyra asked, her voice tense. "They know," Celine whispered. "They know about us. About Daniel. About Emma. They want to take us back." Lyra's eyes darkened. She had expected this day, but hearing it confirmed filled her with fury. "Let them come," she hissed. "We will not bow." Not again. The days that followed grew heavier. The air itself seemed charged with tension, as though the world was holding its breath. Celine grew quiet, her heart torn between fear of losing Daniel and hope that their bond might protect her. Lyra grew restless, pacing the cabin at night, her anger simmering like fire beneath her skin. When the council's presence finally revealed itself, it was not subtle. The skies above the forest burned with streaks of light, ships descending in silence but with power that shook the ground. Lyra and Celine stood outside, their eyes fixed on the heavens. Daniel and Emma were with them, unaware at first of what those lights meant. Daniel asked, his voice filled with worry. "What are those?" Celine swallowed hard, her hands trembling. "My people," she admitted. "They've come for us." Emma stepped closer to Lyra, her eyes flashing. "And what happens now?" Lyra clenched her fists. "Now we fight." The council's voices filled the sisters' minds, heavy and commanding. "Lyra, Celine, you have gone too far. You were sent to Earth to learn humility, to suffer exile. Instead, you form bonds with these creatures? You disgrace your blood. Return now or face destruction." Celine's heart twisted. She wanted to obey, to protect Daniel from danger. But when she looked at him, when she saw the fear in his eyes mixed with his refusal to leave her side, she knew she could not return. Lyra stepped forward, lifting her chin toward the sky. "No," she shouted. "We will not return. You can call it disgrace, you can call it betrayal, but here we have found something greater than your rules. We have found love." The word echoed into the cold night. Love. A word her people rarely used, a word the council despised. The council's response was swift. A beam of searing light shot down from the sky, striking the ground near the forest. Trees splintered, fire spread, and the earth trembled. Daniel pulled Celine close, shielding her, while Emma grabbed Lyra's arm, grounding her in the chaos. The sisters raised their hands, their hidden power glowing through their human forms. Energy surged, forming a barrier that shielded them and their companions. The effort was immense, their bodies straining, but they held firm. The council's voice thundered again. "You defy us for these fragile beings? They will age, they will die. You risk everything for something fleeting." Celine's voice broke through the noise, steady and filled with courage she never thought she had. Even if it is fleeting, it is real. More real than your endless chains. If love is weakness, then I choose weakness, Lyra added, her voice fierce. And if love is rebellion, then I choose rebellion. Daniel and Emma, though powerless compared to the sisters, refused to step aside. Daniel grabbed a fallen branch, holding it as though he could protect Celine from a power far greater than himself. Emma, standing tall beside Lyra, shouted at the skies, "If you want them, you'll have to take us too." The council hesitated. For the first time, the sisters felt uncertainty in those cold voices. Perhaps it was the sight of humans standing without fear. Perhaps it was the strength of the sisters' defiance. Or perhaps it was something deeper, the realization that exile had not broken them but made them stronger. The attack slowed, the skies dimmed, but the voices lingered. "You will regret this. Love cannot save you. You are no longer ours," and then silence. The ships withdrew, leaving behind scorched earth and smoke curling into the night sky. The forest bore scars, but the sisters and their companions still stood, shaken but alive. Celine collapsed into Daniel's arms, tears streaming down her cheeks. "They will never forgive us," she whispered. Daniel held her tighter. "Then let them hate you. I don't care. I'm not letting you go." Lyra stood breathless, her body trembling with exhaustion. Emma stepped close, pressing a hand against her cheek. "You were brilliant," Emma said softly. "Terrifying and brilliant." Lyra closed her eyes, leaning into the touch for just a moment. "I thought exile was a cage," she whispered. "But it gave me you." For the first time in their lives, the sisters felt free, not because they had escaped punishment, but because they had chosen their own path. It was a dangerous path, filled with uncertainty and the promise of more battles to come, but it was theirs. That night, as they sat together in the ruined forest, the firelight dancing on their faces, Celine spoke quietly. "They wanted to punish us with exile. Instead, they gave us a chance to find what they never could understand." Lyra looked at her sister, then at Emma and Daniel sitting close beside them. She nodded slowly, the firelight reflecting in her eyes. "Love is not a weakness. It is our strength." The stars above Earth glimmered, distant and cold, but for the first time, the sisters did not feel alone under them. They had chosen defiance. They had chosen love, and no council, no punishment, no exile could take that away. Celine sat near the edge of the small village one cold evening, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes fixed on the shop where Daniel worked. She told herself she was only watching to learn, only listening to how humans lived, but in her heart she knew there was something more. Each time Daniel's voice carried across the street, her chest warmed. Each time he smiled, she felt lighter. She had never known this feeling on her home world, a place where emotions were hidden behind pride and order. Here, with him, she felt seen in a way she had never felt before. Daniel noticed her again that evening. He waved, his usual kind smile lighting his face. "You're here," he said as he walked toward her. Celine lowered her eyes, her voice soft. "I'm only passing by every day," Daniel teased gently but not unkindly. He held out an apple. "Here, it's fresh." She hesitated, then took it. Their fingers brushed for a moment, and she pulled back quickly, her cheeks burning. Daniel laughed softly, but not at her. It was the kind of laugh that made her feel safe, not small. She bit into the apple, and the sweetness filled her mouth. She smiled without realizing it, and Daniel caught the look. His heart tugged, though he couldn't explain why. Meanwhile, Lyra wandered the opposite side of the village, her mind restless. She had grown tired of watching Celine spend time with the human man, tired of hearing her sister talk about his kindness. Lyra told herself it was foolish, dangerous. But even as she muttered those words, her steps always carried her back to Emma's street. Emma was there again, standing on a ladder, painting bright shapes across the wall of her home. Colors of red, blue, and gold swirled beneath her brush. She hummed softly to herself, fearless of how others might judge her work. Lyra stopped, watching in silence. There was something about Emma's boldness that reminded her of fire, the same fire Lyra carried in her own spirit. Emma glanced down and spotted her. "You again," she said with a grin. Lyra crossed her arms. "Why do you waste your time with this? Splashing colors on walls when the world is filled with bigger problems?" Emma laughed. "Because beauty matters too. You think strength is only in fists and anger? Sometimes it's in colors, in voices, in the courage to create." Lyra wanted to argue, but the words stuck in her throat. No one had ever spoken to her like that before. No one had ever dared. Over the next weeks, both sisters grew closer to the humans who had entered their lives. Selena began to visit Daniel more often. He showed her his workshop, explaining how machines worked, though she understood only half of it. She listened anyway, not for the machines, but for his voice. Sometimes she would ask questions, and Daniel would pause, noticing the strange glow in her eyes, the way she spoke as if she carried secrets too heavy for someone so gentle. He didn't press, though. He simply let her be. With Emma, things were different. Lyra argued with her constantly. Emma pushed, challenged her, never letting her hide behind pride. Yet the arguments always ended with laughter, or silence that felt strangely comfortable. One evening, after a long debate about strength and freedom, Emma handed Lyra a brush. "Try it," she said. Lyra scoffed. "I don't waste time on this." "Afraid you won't be good at it?" Emma teased. Lyra bristled but snatched the brush. She painted a line, clumsy and harsh. Emma smiled, not at the mistake, but at the fact that Lyra had tried. "See? Even fire can make something beautiful." Lyra stared at the mark she had made, feeling an unfamiliar warmth. For the first time in a long while, her pride softened. The sisters began to feel emotions they had never known. Celine's heart raced when Daniel touched her hand too long. She found herself dreaming of him, hearing his laughter even in her sleep. Lyra, though stubborn, felt her chest tighten every time Emma smiled at her. She caught herself waiting for Emma's voice, for her fearless eyes. One night in the cabin, Celine whispered, "Do you ever feel like something inside you is changing? Like your heart is no longer the same?" Lyra frowned, pretending not to understand. "You speak nonsense." But when Selene turned away, Lyra touched her own chest, feeling the truth she would not admit. Yes, something was changing. Still, the bonds were not without struggle. Lyra often warned Selene, "Do not trust too much. Humans are fragile. They will break your heart." Selene only smiled softly and replied, "And what if they heal it instead?" Celine's gentle courage grew stronger with Daniel by her side. She began to laugh more, her eyes shining brighter than Lyra had seen since their exile. Daniel, too, seemed lighter, his burdens softened by her presence. He began to wonder if she was more than just a lost girl, if she was something extraordinary. Emma, meanwhile, pushed Lyra further. She refused to let Lyra hide in shadows. "You act like you don't care," Emma said once, "but your eyes tell another story." Lyra growled in frustration, but Emma only laughed, fearless as ever. And beneath that laughter, Lyra's defenses cracked. She had spent her life fighting against everything, against the council, against exile, against fear. But with Emma, she found someone she didn't want to fight. She found someone she wanted to stand beside. The bond between the sisters also shifted. They had always been close, but now their paths were leading them in new directions. Selene spoke of Daniel often, her voice glowing with warmth. Lyra rolled her eyes but secretly listened. Lyra spoke little of Emma, but Selena noticed the way her sister's eyes softened when she said her name. They both knew the truth, even if words were not spoken. One evening, as the four of them crossed paths by chance in the village, the air seemed to shimmer with quiet magic. Daniel greeted Selene with a smile that reached his eyes. Emma smirked at Lyra, daring her to argue again. For a brief moment, the sisters stood side by side, realizing that what had begun as exile was becoming something else entirely. Love had begun to grow, not like the quick fire of passion, but like roots sinking slowly into the ground, steady and deep. Selene found it in kindness, Lyra found it in courage, and both discovered that Earth was not just a place of punishment. It was a place where hearts could change, where exile could turn into belonging. In the quiet of that night, as the sisters lay in their cabin, Selena whispered, "Maybe we were sent here not to be broken, but to find something we never knew." Lyra closed her eyes, pretending to sleep, but in her heart she knew Selene was right. The council had thought exile would be their end. Instead, it was the beginning of something neither of them had ever dreamed. Love, fragile yet powerful, growing stronger with each passing day. The days on Earth began with struggle. Lyra and Selene were not like the humans around them, no matter how much their bodies now looked human. Their hearts carried the weight of exile, and their minds were filled with confusion. The first challenge was survival. The forest where they had landed was cold and rough. Snow covered the ground, and each night their breath turned into mist as they huddled together for warmth. Food was scarce. They did not know which berries or plants were safe to eat, and their bodies, though strong, were growing weaker. Celine often wandered near the edges of human villages, watching the people carry baskets of bread and fruit, smelling the warmth of cooked meals from small houses. Lyra, however, pulled her back every time. "We cannot trust them," Lyra said firmly. "Humans are unpredictable. If they discover what we are, they will fear us or harm us." Celine lowered her eyes but did not argue. She had seen the kindness and the laughter of children playing, in the way mothers held their babies close. She wondered if all humans were as dangerous as her sister believed. Still, she stayed silent, knowing that Lyra's voice carried both strength and fear. As days passed, the sisters tried to learn. They listened to humans speak in the markets, repeating words quietly to themselves until the language began to form on their tongues. Celine was quick to pick up sounds, her voice soft and musical. Lyra, impatient, grew frustrated at every mistake, her pride stung by her weakness. But slowly the human language began to settle between them like a bridge to survival. One afternoon, Celine wandered farther than usual. She found herself in a small village, standing near a shop filled with warm smells of bread. Her stomach twisted with hunger. She pressed her hand against the glass, staring at the golden loaves stacked inside. She did not notice the man watching her from the corner. His clothes were rough, his hands marked with oil and dirt, but his eyes were kind. He was Daniel, a mechanic who fixed broken machines in the village. He had seen her before, a strange girl who always watched from the shadows, her eyes filled with wonder and sadness. Daniel stepped closer, speaking gently. "Are you hungry?" Celine froze, fear rising in her chest. She wanted to run, but his voice carried no threat. It was warm, like the bread inside the shop. She nodded slightly, unable to lie. Daniel smiled softly and walked into the shop. Moments later, he returned with a loaf wrapped in cloth. He held it out to her without asking anything in return. Celine stared at it, then at him. Her hands trembled as she reached out. Why give this?" she asked, her words broken but clear enough. "Because you need it," Daniel replied simply. She took the bread and whispered, "A thank you." For the first time since exile, warmth filled her chest, not from food but from kindness. She ran back to the cabin, clutching the bread to her heart. Lyra listened to her story with narrowed eyes. "Foolish," she snapped. "Humans never give without wanting something in return. Be careful, Celine." But even as she scolded, her eyes lingered on the bread and she allowed her sister to share it. The next encounter belonged to Lyra. Days later, she wandered into the town alone, determined to prove that she could handle humans better than her gentle sister. She walked past small houses and shops, her sharp eyes studying everything. But as she turned a corner, she heard a sound, voices raised in anger. She saw a young woman surrounded by 3 men, their faces cruel as they taunted her. The woman stood firm, refusing to back down, but she was outnumbered. Without thinking, Lyra stepped forward. "Leave her," she commanded, her voice low and fierce. The men turned, laughing at her. One reached for her arm, but Lyra moved faster, her strength far greater than they expected. She twisted his wrist until he cried out, then shoved him aside with a force that sent him stumbling. The others backed away, startled by her fire. Muttering curses, they scattered into the night. The young woman looked at Lyra with wide eyes. She had dark hair that framed her face and a boldness in her gaze that did not fade even after the danger passed. "You didn't have to help me," she said. "I don't like bullies," Lyra replied sharply. The woman smiled faintly. "Neither do I. My name is Emma." Lyra hesitated before answering. "Lyra." Emma studied her closely, her eyes lingering on the strange strength hidden in her frame. "You're not like the others here, are you?" Lyra stiffened. "I am nothing like them." But instead of fear, Emma's smile grew. "Good. The world needs people who are different." That night, Lyra returned to the cabin with a strange feeling in her chest. Celine noticed it, but Lyra brushed off her questions. Still, in the quiet of the night, Lyra replayed Emma's words over and over. Time passed, and the sisters continued to cross paths with Daniel and Emma. Celine often found Daniel waiting near the shop, always with a gentle smile, always with food to share. He never asked where she came from or why she always seemed lost. Instead, he told her stories about machines, about the village, about his late parents. His voice soothed her, and slowly, she began to trust him. Lyra, on the other hand, found herself drawn back to Emma. The young woman painted on the walls of her small home, Colors splashed boldly as if her spirit refused to be contained. Emma's courage reminded Lyra of herself, yet it was softened with warmth. They argued often, Lyra with her sharp tongue, Emma with her fiery words, but beneath the arguments grew respect. The sisters began to change. Celine no longer feared the humans as much, her laughter returning whenever Daniel shared something kind. Lyra, though she never admitted it, began to lower her guard, her eyes softening when Emma spoke about dreams and freedom. Earth, once a prison, was slowly becoming something else, though neither sister dared to say it aloud. Still, there were struggles. The human world was not easy. Money, shelter, and survival remained constant worries. Sometimes Lyra grew bitter again, reminding Celine that they were exiles, that kindness could not erase punishment. But Celine, with her gentle voice, always replied, "Perhaps exile can be more than punishment. Perhaps it can be a chance." At night, when the sisters sat under the stars, they talked of their encounters. Celine confessed how her heart raced when Daniel looked at her, how his kindness made her feel something new. Lyra scoffed, calling it foolish, yet her thoughts wandered back to Emma's bold smile. Deep inside, she knew she was not immune to the same pull. Neither of them realized yet that these small bonds, these fragile connections with humans, were the first steps toward something greater. They had come to Earth as punishment, but the world was slowly weaving its way into their hearts. Each meeting, each word, each act of kindness was breaking down the walls of anger and fear. The forest cabin was still their shelter, the cold night still their burden, but now the days carried light. Daniel's quiet strength and Emma's fearless spirit became threads tying Lyra and Celine to Earth, pulling them closer to a future they had never imagined. And though they did not yet understand it, love had already begun to stir in the silence between words, in the warmth of shared glances, in the fragile hope growing inside two exiled hearts. Far away from Earth, on a world lit by two suns, there lived two sisters who were unlike anyone on Earth could ever imagine. Their names were Lyra and Celine. They were tall, graceful, and their skin glowed faintly under the light of their twin suns. They belonged to a race that was proud, strict, and unbending in its rules. No one in their world questioned the council, because the council's word was law. To disobey meant shame, punishment, and sometimes exile. Lyra and Celine never thought they would be the ones to face such a fate, but fate often arrives where it is least expected. Lyra, the older sister, had always been strong-willed. She questioned things others accepted, and she carried a fire inside her that often made her clash with the elders. Celine, softer and more gentle, admired her sister's bravery but feared the consequences of her boldness. They were close, bound not only by blood but by the deep connection of sharing every secret, every fear, and every dream since birth. Yet one decision changed everything for them both. It began when Lyra and Celine discovered a forbidden place on their world, a place sealed by the council long ago. Rumors said it contained knowledge too dangerous for their people. But Lyra's curiosity burned brighter than her caution. She convinced Celine to go with her, whispering promises of wonders and truths hidden by those who ruled them. They crossed the silent valleys and slipped past the guards until they stood before the sealed gate. With trembling hands, Lyra activated it using her energy, and the gate opened. What they found inside was not treasure, not weapons, but stories, ancient records of their ancestors, who had once lived freely among the stars, mingling with other races, forming bonds, even falling in love with those from distant worlds. Celine's eyes widened in wonder, but Lyra's heart pounded with anger. Their council had erased this part of their history, choosing control over truth. She shouted in the empty chamber that their people were living in chains, blinded by lies. But the walls had ears. The council's guardians stormed in, their golden armor glinting. The sisters were dragged before the great chamber where the elders waited, their faces cold as stone. The punishment was swift. They had broken the sacred code by entering the forbidden place, and worse, they had spoken against the council's order. For such defiance there would be no forgiveness. "You will be sent to the primitive world," one elder declared, his voice like thunder. "Earth. A place beneath us, a place where you will live hidden, stripped of your honor. Let this exile remind you that pride has no place among our kind." Lyra stood tall, refusing to bow her head. Better to live with truth in exile than with lies in your halls. Her words echoed sharp and fearless, but her hands trembled as she spoke them. Celine beside her felt tears welling in her eyes. She wanted to beg for mercy, but she knew mercy did not exist here. That night, under the twin suns, the sisters were led to the exile ship. Their family was not allowed to see them. No farewells were spoken. As the ship lifted into the skies, Celine gripped her sister's hand, her eyes filled with fear. Lyra squeezed it back, hiding her own dread. "Don't be afraid," she whispered. "We will survive no matter where they send us." The journey across space was long and silent. The sisters sat in the small chamber of their exile vessel, staring out at the stars. Celine thought of home, of the gardens where they used to walk, of the songs their mother once sang. Her heart ached with loss so heavy she thought it might break. Lyra thought of the council, of their cold faces, and promised herself she would never forgive them. Finally, Earth appeared before them, a small blue world, glowing softly in the dark. It looked fragile compared to their own planet. Celine's heart leapt at its beauty, but Lyra only scoffed. "This is their punishment? To send us here?" she muttered. Yet beneath her words even she felt a strange pull, an unspoken curiosity. The ship descended through thick clouds, rattling as it pierced Earth's atmosphere. Fire streaked across the sky as they fell, landing in a dense forest far from human eyes. The doors hissed open, and the sisters stepped out onto soft earth, snowflakes drifting down from the branches above. The cold bit at their skin, shocking them, for their world had never known such icy touch. Celine shivered, wrapping her arms around herself, while Lyra lifted her chin, defiant even against the unfamiliar chill. They walked together through the forest, their alien forms glowing faintly under the moonlight, but they could not stay as they were. The exile rules forced them to shift into human forms, blending into this world's people. Their glowing skin dimmed, their ears rounded, their height shortened slightly until they appeared as two human girls with strange beauty in their eyes. The transformation felt like a chain around Lyra's neck. She hated it, hated that she was forced to hide what she truly was. "They want to humiliate us," she spat, kicking at the snow. "To bury who we are." Celine touched her arm gently. "Maybe we can still find something here," she whispered, though her voice shook. Their first days on Earth were hard. They had no home, no food, no guide. The forest gave them shelter, but the human world outside was loud and confusing. Strange machines roared on the roads, lights glittered in the cities, and the language was heavy on their tongues. Lyra kept her guard high, sneering at everything. Celine, though frightened, could not help but wonder at the colors, the sounds, the laughter of humans passing by. On the fifth night, as they huddled together beneath a broken roof of an abandoned cabin, Celine whispered, "Do you think we will ever return home?" Lyra was silent for a long moment. Then she shook her head slowly. "No, home has cast us away. This is all we have now." She looked at her sister, her eyes burning. "But we will not break. Not here, not anywhere." Celine nodded, though tears rolled down her cheeks. She leaned against her sister, finding strength in her fire. The stars above Earth twinkled softly as if watching over them. Neither of the sisters could have known then that their exile was not just punishment. Hidden in the days to come were moments that would change their lives forever. Moments that would show them that even in the harshest fate, love could bloom where it was least expected. That first night in the cabin ended with Lyra staring into the darkness, her fists clenched tight. She told herself she would never forgive the council, never love this world, never bow to Earth's fate. Yet in the silence of the snow-filled forest, a small seed of change had already been planted inside her heart and inside Celine's. A seed neither of them could see, but one that would grow with every step they took in this strange new land.